Well, parenting is a tough job, even if you have well behaved children. But what if you have wayward, prodigal kids? So, how do we respond as parents to that? Joining us from Florida today to share some solid advice on this is Laine Lawson Craft. She is a public speaker, the host of the Warfare Parenting podcast, and a best selling author, with her latest book being Warfare Parenting, a Daily Battle Plan to Fight for Your Child. Laine, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to share.
Okay, well, I understand that you and your husband raised three children in a faith-based home, a Christian home, and yet they each experienced their own, I guess, different journeys of rebellion and, as we would call, prodigal, I guess, like prodigal journey. So what were your initial responses? What
Well,
kinds
I,
of things did your kids try to, what was going on
right,
there?
right. Well, at the time, we thought these kids are just defiant. They're rebellious.
Mm,
They were driving us crazy. I think looking back, what we realized, we weren't fighting against our teenagers. We were fighting against a warfare in the spirit. And so, my oldest child was into drugs and alcohol, and my middle child was into these concerts where you go and you lose your mind, whether on alcohol or drugs, and just get crazy. And then my daughter was suffering from depression for a period in her teenage years. So all three of them had very unique battles that sucked them in, to the darkness of the world.
yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people can relate to that these days, especially the depression thing. It seems to be very rampant, and anxiety as well. And yeah, I can certainly relate to that in my family. So, what kinds of things did you try to bring your kids? How did you try to bring them back in line? And did it work, like at the time?
Right, right. Well, again, I felt a real call. I wrote two books. One is The Parent's Battle Plan. And so it was the nonfiction book of the year in 2023, which really just guides parents into tools and applications and things to work through. And then I came out with this daily devotional, Warfare Parenting. And that was just to keep you strengthened in the battle. So, where I'm going with this is, when I look back, I felt isolated. I felt like, am I the only parent that is battling this kid that won't come home on time, or, continues to abuse alcohol in a way that I know is very destructive? And so, as I look back, I really believe I tried a lot of things, and the first one was just control. You think, I'm just going to ground them till they can't get out of the house, and
Nope,
those kind of
that doesn't
things.
work.
It really doesn't. I guess what really was the turnaround is when it got so bad, I just fell to my knees and said, God, these are your children. You formed them in my womb, and you've asked me to steward them. And I just started really leaning into, man, am I praying for this child? That was probably the biggest aha moment, was when I realized, hey, if I'm not praying for my kids to get out of this, then who is?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is powerful. And how long did that take?
Well, that's interesting you should ask, because my baby is a girl,
Mhm.
and she was around 17, 18 when just a touch of God happened for her. She was battling not fitting in, feeling like maybe life would be better without her in it. Very
Mhm.
dark place. And her and a friend began to pray in a car. And she said immediately she felt God just touch her heart. And she knew it was Him, because the tears dried up and she had hope again. So my baby girl really didn't endure it too long. And then Lawson was in his early 20s. It was my eldest child. I prayed 15 years for God to touch him in a way, because I knew deep down, there was nothing in the natural I could do anymore. It was going to have to take a hand of God. And I want to give somebody hope today. My child didn't clean up for God to come in. My son was high on cocaine in an Uber driver's car when the Uber driver started praying for my son out loud. And God came in that Uber and touched Stephen so profoundly. That was the beginning of his turnaround. But it took 15 years, not 15 weeks, 15 months, but 15 years I would cry out to God and say, God, you've got to help my child get delivered out of this darkness.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how he'll put people in your child's path or in your path, and and sometimes that's what changes everything. That's amazing. So, what led you were mentioning the 2023 book, which wasn't that long ago. So that's long after your kids have gone through a lot of this stuff, and I feel like today's kids might even have it even harder with social media and stuff when it comes to depression and anxiety and whatnot. But Laine, what led you to believe that traditional parenting methods are insufficient for today's teen crisis?
Well, we are facing a crisis,
Yeah.
and I believe there's not a voice strong enough yet. And I hope that we can change that through these books, Warfare Parenting, and hopefully Warfare Parenting small groups all over. We need to give parents the equipment and the empowerment that they are first full in authority. We've even been usurped as parents and grandparents in what authority we have over these children. So I really encourage and empower parents and grandparents and loved ones. Look, you are in charge of that child. Nobody else is. And so I want to leave that. And then, secondly, this is a spiritual battle. This is a spiritual battle. It says that the enemy comes out to seek, kill, and destroy, but we have already found victory in Jesus. So I ask parents to look into their heart and ask God to help them, and then to ask God to help guide their children back to the ways we hoped that we could raise them in.
You note that prodigal journeys can occur at various stages of life, including adult prodigals or adult rebellions. So, what is the commonality with these journeys?
I think the commonality is just the darkness. Our media, everything you try, the phones, internet, everything is working against those that are trying to, live right and do right and make good choices. And so, my biggest takeaway would be you can start over at any time. If you've got an adult child, there are a lot of them that have just made, poor choices or continue a self-destructive path. You can just get in there and say, listen, I love you. I'm so sorry that we've encountered all of this. Every day's a new day. And really, you can begin a new day any day.
Oh, that's beautiful. What initial steps should someone take when they realize their child is rebellious or sort of going the wrong way?
Well, the first steps again is just to kind of look into the mirror and first say, am I emulating? Am I doing everything I can to show and model a loving God that's unconditional? And am I living in a way that would be conducive for them to come to me? And I don't say that out of condemnation. I say that just to say, you know what? Make sure. I used to have something on my refrigerator, and I love to hate it. It said, you can do and say anything you see me say or do. It held me to a real high accountability. But listen, this is not your battle. This is God's battle. This is a spiritual warfare. And all I can give you the strength to do is just stand persistent, stand in authority, and just pray and believe that if God could bring my three prodigals back home, and I'm telling you, it was a long, long battle, He can do it for you too.
Wow, I can't believe all three of them came back they're in good places now. And what are their ages now?
Yeah, so they're 33, 31, and 30,
Hmm.
and two of which are now parents. So I'm a
Yeah.
grandmama.
So this happened a while back, like we're talking 15, 10 years ago, however long ago.
Well, not really.
Okay.
Stephen was around 27.
Okay.
So that was just 5 years ago when he
Wow.
had that experience
Mm.
and changed his life.
What advice do you have for parents who have been trying to win their child back for years, but nothing seems to be working?
Well, I think communication. That's what I would say. I think sometimes when our kids are rebellious and they don't seem to listen, we kind of step away. And I don't blame you. I've been there. You just feel like you're, hitting your head against a wall and they're not listening. So again, you can come in with a communication barrier breaker, and that is, hey, listen, I'm sorry if I've done anything. Is there anything we could do to open the door back for us to just try and walk down a path of getting along? You know what I'm saying? Just throw out that olive branch of starting again and saying you're sorry, and just allowing that level of communication to open back up.
Yeah, that's a good idea, especially if there's been a barrier there for several years and maybe they're not speaking, to their parent or
Or you're
something.
angry, as the parent, you're like, man, what else can I do for this kid? And I often suggest sometimes writing a letter, just letting them read your thoughts, that you love them and you want the best for them and you're there for them, but you cannot stand by and maybe watch them make these choices that are ultimately not going to be their best.
And then, I guess any advice for the single parents with wayward kids? I feel like they have even that much more of a burden on them, especially if there's other kids too that they're, trying to contend with and worry about as well.
That's right. And listen, I hate to tell you, but we're dealing more with single households
Hmm.
than ever before here in America. So many parents are doing this alone. What I can suggest, and I know it's best, is to get with that ex or that father and say, listen, we've got to be on the same page. It's a scriptural reference. It says, a house divided will never stand. And you say it for the love and sake of your child. Hey, we may not get along. We live in separate homes and households, but we've got to get on the same page for the benefit of this child.
Hmm. And then, the reality is that not all prodigal stories have happy endings, unfortunately. So, what message can you share with those who are, still estranged, or maybe they have even lost a rebellious kid?
Well, I touch on that in the Parents Battle Plan. I have a whole chapter about when the miracle you expected didn't happen.
Mm,
But I encourage parents, the miracle is staying in relationship with God
mhm.
because He is sovereign. And there are not always good outcomes. We've got a fentanyl poisoning epidemic where our kids, are not waking up. So I just encourage you, don't let that keep you from enjoying what God had in store for you. And that takes a miracle. That takes the Holy Spirit and God's strength to carry on, even when our children may not even make it in their earthly life down here.
Yeah, it's sad. When a prodigal returns, what are some steps to facilitate forgiveness and healing? I know you sort of touched on that, but is it important to remember that rebuilding trust and growth and spiritual growth together takes time?
Does it does.
Yeah.
And I say the two most powerful words in any relationship is I'm sorry. And if you both reciprocate that, and again, come together and say, boy, was that a road I don't want to go back down, and you don't either. What are some ways that we can build on this together? And it is powerful, and it involves them and you, and it really doesn't matter what age they are. That can begin again at any age.
Yeah, no, exactly. In hindsight, do you think that maybe God turned what the enemy meant for harm into something good? It seems that way.
It does, and I believe, it's hard to see it in the fight. So
Uh-huh.
again, I want to give someone hope today. It's hard. I call it the meantime. In the middle of, calling out to God, please change my child, and them turning around is the meantime because, the enemy knows he wants to distract you and discourage you. So today, I hope this brings you hope that, you know what, my kids today are, man, they are helping so many, not only other parents, but people that are in bad places and saying, look, he did it for me. And let me show you some of the steps. And I want to tell you, they all believe that at some points we kind of lose hope for others. And we're all big believers that we have until our last breath to turn our lives around.
Yeah, and I'm sure that your kids, especially if they're in any type of leadership role, counseling, guidance, anything like that. I mean, I'm sure their stories are that much more powerful because they have been through it themselves and they sort of understand what the younger mind and the younger heart can be susceptible to.
Yes, and they get it. I mean, they were living it and they know what entices you and they know how hard the battle is. And you're right about social media. It is so much of a greater influence, to these kids. So it's everywhere. The battle is everywhere.
Yeah. Sometimes it starts with yourself as well. Sometimes God needs to change your heart so that you can, communicate with your child better instead of always maybe harping at them or you're doing this or that. I've got some stories of my own family where that has happened, and like it just changed everything when it's the
Well, and
person that's
a big
standing in judgment that needs to
right.
change.
Right. And a big pivotal point for me was I'm very boisterous, as you can tell, and very vivacious. So I had to learn to pause and
Hmm.
not panic. Because my first response in the two o'clock in the morning phone call, are they in jail? Have they flipped another car? Instead of panic, I learned to pause and just pray. Okay, I've helped me kind of like you're saying, manage my emotions so I can better react to the situations.
Yeah, great advice there, Laine. We're out of time, but thanks so much for sharing your story with us today. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Laine Lawson Craft is the author of Warfare Parenting, a Daily Battle Plan to Fight for Your Child.